Before dawn on the 10th of July 1943, more than 3,200 Allied ships, craft, and boats were closing on Sicily. Roughly 160,000 troops were committed to the assault, if Axis reserves, aircraft, and naval forces concentrated on the island in time. The largest amphibious operation yet attempted in the Mediterranean could become a disaster at the waterline. One early counterattack could trap men, vehicles, and landing craft against the sea. Yet German headquarters still had to guard against another invasion farther east. Across the eastern Mediterranean, British intelligence had created the 12th Army 12 divisions with headquarters, radio traffic, interpreters, maps, camps, and movements, but no soldiers. Every clue pointed toward Greece, Crete, and the Balkans. Even Sicily could be read as the diversion. This was Operation Barclay. It did not protect the real invasion by making Sicily disappear. It created another invasion that seemed more dangerous, then allowed Hitler's own fears to complete the picture. Real divisions guarded real coastlines against fictional landing craft. The most dangerous army in the Mediterranean had no soldiers. In January 1943, before Operation Barclay had a name, Roosevelt, Churchill, and their senior commanders gathered at Casablanca with a map of the Mediterranean spread between them. The campaign in North Africa was nearing its end. Soon, Allied troops, trucks, landing craft, aircraft, and supply ships would be available for another operation. The question was where to send them. Sicily seemed to answer itself. The island lay about 90 miles north of Africa and only 2.5 miles from the toe of Italy. It sat across the central Mediterranean like a stone gate. From its ports and airfields, Axis aircraft and warships threatened Allied shipping. Capture Sicily, and the sea route east would become safer, while its ports and airfields opened the next move against Italy. There was a political prize as well. An invasion of Italian national territory might deepen the crisis inside Mussolini's government and push a war-weary ally away from Germany. But the choice was not simple. General George Marshall and other American planners feared that every division, tank, and ship committed to the Mediterranean delayed the assault across the English Channel. British strategists saw Sicily as a door into southern Europe. After several days of argument, the Allies selected Sicily. General Dwight Eisenhower received command, while staff officers converted a circle on the map into shipping tables, air plans, beach diagrams, and loading schedules. Every page made the invasion more real and created another signal the enemy might detect. That decision created an immediate security problem. A good military target leaves several believable alternatives. Sicily did not. It was close to Allied bases in Tunisia. It controlled important sea lanes. It pointed directly toward Italy. German and Italian planners did not need to steal a secret document to place it near the top of their list. They only needed a ruler, a shipping report, and a map. If Axis commanders became certain that Sicily was the main objective, they could thicken the coastal defenses, reposition mobile German formations, reinforce the island's airfields, and concentrate naval attention around the approaches. The landing force would then arrive exactly where the defenders had prepared to destroy it. So Allied planners faced a paradox. They could conceal ships, headquarters, and embarkation dates. They could reduce radio traffic and move units at night. But they could not hide the geography. North Africa was filling with the men and material of an amphibious assault, and Sicily remained directly across the water. The solution was not to make Sicily look impossible. It was to make another target look even more important. The Casablanca discussions had also considered Greece, Crete, the Balkans, and Sardinia. Each offered strategic value and lay within Allied reach. Greece carried special weight in Hitler's thinking. The Balkans protected Germany's southeastern flank, communications, occupation system, and access to resources. A landing there could appear to threaten far more than one island. The enemy already knew Sicily made sense. Operation Barclay would succeed only if it made the obvious answer look like the decoy. By the spring of 1943, the deception problem had moved from a map table at Casablanca to a quieter set of rooms in Cairo. The officer responsible was Brigadier Dudley Clark, head of a force, the Allied Deception Organization for the Middle East and Mediterranean. His problem was not imagination but consistency. At an A-Force desk in Cairo, every radio net, unit location, agent report, requisition, and camp had to point toward the same campaign without appearing deliberately connected. The name chosen was the British 12th Army. On paper, it contained 12 divisions. That meant more than drawing 12 unit symbols on a map. A formation of that size should generate headquarters traffic, requests, movements, paperwork, and evidence of future destinations. One impossible location or careless signal could give German analysts the loose thread that unraveled the army. So a force worked backward from what a real Balkan invasion would require. A headquarters needed communications. False signals and controlled reports gave the 12th Army a voice. Troops preparing for Greece would need language support, so Greek interpreters were recruited. Staff officers planning landings would require maps, and soldiers entering foreign territory would need local money. Greek and French maps and currencies were collected. Dummy encampments supplied the visible outline of formations that existed only in files. The most useful props were deliberately ordinary: a wireless log, a requisition form, a stack of drachma notes, a marked road map, rows of tents seen from a reconnaissance aircraft. Together, they gave a formation with no bodies the daily metabolism of a military institution. Double agents carried parts of the same story through channels the Germans believed they controlled. None of these details was decisive by itself. A radio message might be routine. A request for maps might mean contingency planning. A camp could be a staging area for something else. But when each clue pointed toward the same eastern destination, uncertainty began to harden into an order of battle. That was the hidden strength of Barclay. The Allies were not asking German intelligence to accept one spectacular lie. They were allowing German analysts to assemble the lie themselves from ordinary pieces. Across the eastern Mediterranean, Cairo produced signals, camps suggested concentrations, agents supplied reports, and administrative activity implied preparation. In German files and map rooms, those fragments became one practical question: how many Allied divisions could strike Greece or Crete? If the deception failed here, the consequences would reach Sicily. One intercepted contradiction, an impossible unit location, a careless message, a camp without the traffic expected from its supposed strength, could expose the 12th Army before Husky sailed. Axis planners could then treat the Balkan threat as theater and release attention and mobile forces toward the real target. A fictitious army could not merely appear once. It had to wake each morning, send messages, require supplies, collect maps, and behave as though thousands of men were preparing to move. The headquarters was imaginary, but its paperwork had to obey military logic. Barclay also aimed beyond German ground forces. Its threats against Greece, Crete, the Balkans, and southern France were intended to widen the defensive problem and help keep the Italian fleet near the Adriatic instead of concentrating near Sicily. What looked like scattered preparation was actually one machine. By early summer, the 12th Army had no riflemen, no artillery crews, and no landing craft. Yet it possessed something almost as useful: a recognizable military footprint. The army did not need soldiers yet. It only needed German intelligence to reserve a place for them on the map. The 12th Army already had signals, maps, and an administrative footprint. What it still lacked was evidence that appeared to have escaped British control. That evidence entered the Atlantic inside a steel canister. Early on the 30th of April 1943, the submarine HMS Seraph surfaced off Huelva on Spain's southern coast. Its crew brought up the body of a man dressed as a Royal Marines officer. A briefcase was chained beneath his coat. The papers identified him as Major William Martin, supposedly killed in an aircraft accident while carrying confidential correspondence. Martin had never existed. British intelligence officers Ewan Montague and Charles Cholmondeley had constructed him from small, disposable objects. His pockets held identity papers, receipts, keys, cigarettes, and the photograph of a fiancée named Pam. Personal letters suggested an unfinished life. Even his finances were imperfect. A courier carrying only secret documents might look manufactured. A dead officer carrying private clutter looked human. Inside the briefcase were letters written to resemble senior military correspondents. They indicated that Allied forces were preparing operations against Greece and Sardinia, while Sicily appeared to be a secondary target or cover operation. This was Operation Mincemeat, but Mincemeat did not replace Barclay. It entered a deception already in motion. German intelligence had seen signs of an eastern Mediterranean army, Greek preparations, false communications, and possible threats to the Balkans. The briefcase now offered something different: documentary proof that seemed never intended for German eyes. The location was chosen carefully. Spain was officially neutral, but German intelligence maintained contacts there. If Spanish officials recovered the body, the papers might be examined, copied, and quietly passed to the Abwehr before being returned to Britain. Every link could fail. The fishermen might not find the body. Spanish authorities might secure the briefcase without opening it. German agents might reject the papers as planted material. If that happened, the most dramatic element of Barclay could expose the larger pattern instead of confirming it. The body was found near Huelva. The briefcase entered Spanish custody. When it eventually returned to British hands, examination indicated that the letters had been removed from their envelopes and read. Intercepted German communications then provided the confirmation London needed. The information had reached the enemy, and the Balkan warning was being treated seriously. Now picture the discovery from the German side. A dead courier did not arrive like a propaganda broadcast. He washed ashore carrying private letters, damp papers, a photograph, and correspondence between senior officers. His documents agreed with signs already collected from agents, radio traffic, maps, and preparations across the eastern Mediterranean. That agreement was the weapon. The Germans were not being asked to believe that Sicily was worthless. They were being shown that Greece and Sardinia might be the main objectives, with Sicily serving as the feint. The conclusion fitted the evidence already on their desks and the fears already shaping Hitler's map. A single false letter might be doubted. A false letter that confirms an existing intelligence picture feels like proof. Operation Mincemeat became famous because its central image was unforgettable: a dead man carrying a secret. But the corpse did not create the deception alone. Barclay had prepared the room, arranged the maps, and placed the imaginary divisions where German analysts expected to find them. Major Martin carried the final document into that room. The corpse was not the whole lie. It was the signature at the bottom. By late June 1943, Operation Barclay had a headquarters, a fictional army, and documents pointing toward Greece. But a real invasion would not be preceded only by paperwork. It would be preceded by broken railways, cut telephone lines, and attacks on the routes an occupying army needed to move reserves toward the coast. That was the purpose of Operation Animals. Brigadier Eddie Myers, head of the British military mission in Greece, coordinated a concentrated sabotage campaign with SOE teams and Greek resistance groups during the final weeks before Husky. The attacks were designed to resemble the preparation phase of an invasion: isolate the southern battlefield, delay reinforcements, interrupt orders, and force occupation troops to guard bridges, roads, railways, and mountain passes. On the night of June 2021, a six-man SOE team destroyed the railway bridge over the Asopos River in central Greece. Reaching it required climbing through a steep gorge beneath a guarded rail line, carrying explosives into a position where discovery could leave the saboteurs trapped below the bridge. The charges detonated and severed a major north-south railway connection. On June 21, ELAS fighters ambushed a German column in the narrow Sarantaporo Pass. Vehicles were caught where the terrain restricted movement and turned the road itself into a trap. To Axis commanders, the action resembled an organized attempt to isolate Greece as Allied warnings pointed toward invasion. Elsewhere, resistance fighters attacked transport routes and communications across occupied Greece. The damage was not merely theatrical. German reports described a systematic campaign against telecommunications and transport networks. Guards were strengthened. Routes were inspected. Troops searched rail corridors and mountain roads. A bridge destroyed in Greece did not move one Allied soldier closer to Sicily, but it could make releasing a German unit from Greece appear reckless. That was the reversal at the center of Animals. Fictional divisions were creating real security demands. From the Axis perspective, the pattern was difficult to dismiss. First came reports of Allied formations in the eastern Mediterranean. Then came interpreters, maps, radio activity, and the documents carried by Major Martin. Now, Greek railways and communications were being attacked in ways that resembled the isolation of a future landing area. But the explosions carried a cost that did not appear on Dudley Clark's deception maps. Greek resistance fighters were not props. They operated among communities vulnerable to arrest, interrogation, forced labor, and collective punishment. Sabotage might delay military traffic for days. Retaliation could scar a village for generations. The resistance was also politically divided, and every British-supported mission entered a struggle over Greece's post-war future. This made animals different from a dummy camp or false radio net. If a canvas vehicle was discovered, the deception lost credibility. If a partisan operation was compromised, people could be imprisoned or killed, villages could be burned, and resistance networks could be broken. Yet the campaign continued through the critical period before Husky. German occupation commands had to treat the attacks as a military problem. Attention and manpower were pulled into protecting a country the Allies were not preparing to invade. Operation Animals did not prove that Greece was the target. No single demolished bridge could do that. It did something more useful. It made the fictional invasion behave like a real one. Barclay had given the 12th Army a headquarters and a voice. In Greece, the resistance gave it consequences. Now picture the Mediterranean from Hitler's map room. To the west lay Sardinia and southern France. In the center stood Sicily, the obvious stepping stone toward Italy. Farther east lay Crete, Greece, and the long Balkan coastline. Each protected ports, airfields, sea routes, occupation forces, and communications stretching into southeastern Europe. From this side of the map, the British story did not look absurd. Allied forces were massing in North Africa. The eastern Mediterranean contained bases from which an attack on Greece or Crete was possible. German intelligence had already placed the British 12th Army in the region. Agents reported preparations. Wireless traffic suggested headquarters activity. Greek interpreters had been recruited. Maps and currencies had been collected. Sabotage was tearing at transport routes inside occupied Greece. Then the documents carried by Major Martin appeared to confirm the same direction. Hitler was not being asked to choose between evidence and fantasy. He was being asked to decide which of several plausible Allied targets represented the main effort. And Sicily was almost too obvious. A direct assault on the island made military sense, but that could also make it an ideal diversion. If the Allies wanted Germany to concentrate in Sicily while striking Greece, then the visible build-up opposite the island might be exactly what deception should look like. Every precaution taken against being fooled created another way to be fooled. This was the decision trap. Ignoring the Balkans could expose Germany's southeastern flank. Reinforcing them reduced the forces available elsewhere. Waiting for certainty meant surrendering the initiative to an enemy, choosing the time and place of the landing. Hitler chose to take the eastern threat seriously. Ultra-intercepts showed that Hitler and other senior German leaders accepted the documents and prepared to defend Greece. The Balkan garrisons were not there only because of Barclay. Occupation duties, partisan warfare, communications, and the strategic value of southeastern Europe also demanded troops. Barclay's contribution was to make releasing those forces appear dangerous. During the same period, German strength in the Balkans rose from 8 divisions to 18. One later assessment credited Barclay and Mincemeat with helping reinforce that build-up and concluded that the German High Command overestimated Allied strength in the eastern Mediterranean by roughly 100%. Not all 10 additional divisions moved because of deception. Occupation, duty, and partisan warfare mattered too. Barclay's effect was subtler. It made releasing them look dangerous. That mistake mattered because an order of battle is not merely a list. It tells commanders where an enemy can strike, how many reserves must remain available, which ports require protection, and where aircraft, ships, fuel, and staff attention may be needed. Doubling the enemy on paper can force real decisions even when none of the additional formations exist. The Italian fleet faced the same geography. Barclay was intended to keep its attention near the Adriatic and the Balkan approaches rather than allow every available naval asset to concentrate against Sicily. Strategic defense is a limited reserve moving between threatened doors. If Hitler stripped Greece and the Balkans and Barclay proved true, the Allies could enter southeastern Europe through the opening. If he kept those forces in place, and Sicily was the real target, the island would have to fight without every reinforcement the wider theater might have provided. Each earlier decision now increased the cost of reversing the next one. Reports had been accepted, units had been assigned, routes had been guarded. Staff officers had built plans around the 12th Army. To dismiss the threat meant not only changing the map, but admitting that many separate pieces of intelligence had produced the same false conclusion, except they were not separate. That was the mechanism German headquarters could not see. The radio traffic, agents, administrative clues, Major Martin's papers, and explosions in Greece appeared to be independent witnesses. In reality, they belonged to one deception architecture. Hitler saw exactly what Barclay needed him to see, not a lie, but a pattern. By early July, that pattern had already done its work. The real invasion fleet had not yet reached Sicily, but the Mediterranean defense system was already divided among threats it could not safely ignore. On the evening of the 9th of July 1943, the real invasion entered the last hours of Operation Barclay's protection. More than 3,200 Allied ships, craft, and boats were moving towards Sicily. Ahead lay a triangular island of roughly 10,000 square miles. Major beaches, ports, and airfields clustered around the southeast, where the British 8th Army and American 7th Army intended to land across a front nearly 100 miles wide. Italian divisions guarded the perimeter. Mobile German formations waited inland. The defenders understood the central problem. Once the Allies established a firm beachhead, Sicily would probably be lost. Their best chance was to crush the landing force while men, vehicles, and ammunition were still trapped between shoreline and sea. Barclay had helped divide the wider Mediterranean defense. It had not removed the troops standing on Sicily. Then the weather nearly did the Axis' work for them. A 40-mile-per-hour gale struck the armada. Smaller craft pitched through rough water. In the air, inexperienced pilots fought darkness, wind, and an overly complex flight plan. At about 11:30 p.m., the airborne landings began. Of 144 gliders carrying British troops toward zones outside Syracuse, only 12 reached their targets. 69 crashed into the sea. In the American sector, Colonel James Gavin's 3,400 paratroopers scattered across the countryside. Gavin landed roughly 25 miles from his assigned drop zone. The airborne shield meant to block roads behind the beaches had fractured before the first landing craft arrived. If Axis reserves reached the coast before the scattered paratroopers and amphibious troops organized themselves, Husky could end with thousands of men pinned against the water. And the defenders were not asleep. Axis aircraft had spotted convoys moving towards Sicily on July 9. General Alfredo Guzzoni ordered a full alert at 10 p.m. By midnight, he knew airborne troops were landing. At 1:45 a.m., nearly an hour before the amphibious assault, he correctly concluded that the main landings were coming in the southeast. The first assault waves were due at 2:45. This was the final countdown Barclay could no longer control. The Axis had tactical warning. What it lacked was the ability to rebuild the entire Mediterranean disposition in 3 hours. Along much of the coast, poorly equipped Italian units offered limited resistance. British troops moved into Syracuse quickly. American forces also came ashore, but around Gela and the Piano Lupo crossroads, the battle narrowed to one question. Could the beachhead be broken before it became an army? Italian tanks entered Gela. At Piano Lupo, scattered paratroopers and advancing infantry first faced about 20 Italian tanks. Then, a much larger force from the Hermann Goering Division, roughly 90 German Mark III, and IV tanks supported by artillery, reconnaissance troops, and engineers. Naval guns offshore opened fire. On the beaches, soft sand, shifting bars, blocked exits, air attacks, and artillery created severe congestion. By mid-morning, between 150 and 200 landing craft were stranded along the shoreline. Trucks and ammunition waited behind clogged exits, while engineers and service troops tried to clear routes inland. The invasion was no longer a clean arrow on a map. It was wet radios, stalled craft, scattered units, and cooks and clerks carrying rifles because the line needed every available body. By the end of July 10, the American beachhead was only 2 to 4 miles deep in places. The next morning, Guzzoni committed much of the Hermann Goering and Livorno divisions against the shallow center near Gela. 2 German panzer battalions closed to within about 2,000 yards of the beaches. If those tanks reached the unloading areas, they would find fuel, vehicles, landing craft, and troops compressed against the sea. They never reached them. Infantry, rangers, engineers, improvised groups of paratroopers, artillery, and naval gunfire stopped the attacks. By darkness on July 11, after the 7th Army had suffered more than 2,300 casualties, its worst single day of the campaign, the Americans still held. Then logistics began closing the door. During the first 3 days, the U.S. Army and Navy moved 66,285 personnel, 17,766 tons of cargo, and 7,396 vehicles across Sicily's southern beaches. Every ramp that dropped and every truck that cleared an exit made the next counterattack harder. Operation Barclay had not made Sicily undefended. It had helped ensure that the Axis could not treat Sicily as the only door that mattered. The defenders saw the invasion coming. What they could not do was summon every force the Mediterranean had already committed elsewhere. On the 17th of August, 1943, Allied patrols entered Messina and the campaign for Sicily ended. The island had not fallen because of one corps, one radio net, or one imaginary army. It had fallen through naval power, air superiority, logistics, infantry, artillery, and 38 days of hard fighting. German and Italian units had resisted, counterattacked, and eventually withdrawn across the Strait of Messina. Operation Barclay had not won the battle for them. It had helped shape the battlefield before the first landing craft lowered its ramp. That distinction matters. Deception could not destroy tanks at Gela, guide gliders through a gale, clear a blocked beach exit, or carry ammunition inland. It could force the Axis to plan for several wars at once. Greece had to be guarded. Crete could not be ignored. The Adriatic remained a naval concern. Sardinia and southern France still appeared on the map. Sicily received defenders, but not every defender the wider Mediterranean might have supplied. The political consequences arrived before the shooting on the island had ended. On July 25, after the Allied landings, and amid a crisis already deepened by military defeat, Benito Mussolini was removed from power and arrested. Italy did not leave the war immediately, but the invasion had opened a fracture inside the Axis. On September 3, Allied troops crossed to the Italian mainland. 5 days later, Italy's armistice with the Allies was announced. Barclay did not cause all of this. It helped prevent the Axis from treating Sicily as the only urgent threat before the invasion reached the shore. Its deeper success appeared in German intelligence files. The exaggerated Eastern Mediterranean order of battle did not vanish when Sicily was revealed as the real target. German intelligence continued to carry the inflated estimate, giving later Allied planners an established fiction they could reuse. The deception had become an institutional error. Once accepted, it made other imaginary formations and Mediterranean threats easier to sell. That was the strategic legacy of the 12th Army. It never crossed a beach, fired a gun, or buried a soldier. Yet real officers wrote plans against it. Real ships watched the Adriatic. Real formations remained tied to the Balkans. Its divisions occupied space in enemy calculations. After Operation Husky had exposed the original deception, there was a darker ledger beneath the success. In Greece, sabotage brought arrests, reprisals, forced labor, and danger to communities that would never see the invasion they had been used to suggest. Barclay's battlefield extended into occupied villages as well as German map rooms. Imagine the final image. Sicily is marked as lost, Mussolini is gone, Allied forces are preparing to enter mainland Italy. In a German headquarters, a unit marker still rests over the eastern Mediterranean. It represents 12 divisions. None of them exist. The army that never landed still held ground in Hitler's mind. Subscribe for more hidden turning points where forgotten details redirected entire wars.